Thank you so much for joining us this morning for our Marin Communications Forum for October. We've collectively been through a lot over the last few years, and every time I have an opportunity to step into a room with friends and board members and partners and new friends, I always try to appreciate the moment and pause, because we know that it can be taken away from us overnight. So I'm so grateful to be in a room with all of you. Thank you for joining us. We're here today because our families are suffering. They've been suffering for some time, but we know that the pandemic has exacerbated that. According to the Marin Economic Forum, 37% of households in Marin do not earn enough income to make ends meet. So think about that. That's 1 in 3 households can't get by without public or private assistance. The minimum wage worker in California earns about $26,000 a year after taxes and is only considered living in poverty if that individual is also supporting 3 other individuals that make $0. So low incomes and the high cost of living make for a terrible recipe. The combined costs of housing as well as childcare make our county unaffordable for many. But there are so many opportunities for us to invest in policy and systems change efforts that have meaningful impact for our vulnerable populations, including our low-income families of color. For example, we need to ensure that people are making a living wage that's truly commensurate with the need in Marin County to be able to actually live in Marin County. And we should be supporting affordable childcare or tax credits that cap net expenses at a reasonable portion of family income. There are solutions, and they're being worked on as we speak. And First 5 Marin is so honored to welcome one of the people who can speak to more of the issues that our policymakers are grappling with, Congressman Jared Huffman, as our special guest this morning. Congressman Huffman represents California's 2nd Congressional District, as you all know, was first elected, I forgot my glasses at home, so I'm struggling a little bit with my notes. But he was elected to Congress in November of 2012 and currently serves on the Committee on Natural Resources, the Committee on Transportation and Infrastructure, and the Select Committee on the Climate Crisis. The congressman also founded the Congressional Free Thought Caucus to promote sound public policy based on reason, science, and moral values, while protecting the secular character of government and championing the value of freedom of thought worldwide. Congressman, thank you for all the work that you do representing our district and for being with us today. Please join me in giving the congressman a warm welcome.
Thank you, Pega, and good morning, everyone. It is really great to be with you. Great to be with folks who are so focused on kids and families, and really appreciate you including me in this forum. It's been a while. I've been here before with this group pre-pandemic, and it's good to see some of you back. I know that over time we will begin to fill this room again like we used to, but it's great to be back. And I see Supervisor Dennis Rodoni here. We should thank him for his good work and recognize him. So look, I have the privilege of representing this amazing district. I was just talking to some folks about the work I do when I'm in the district, because I have 6 counties going all the way from here to the Oregon border. And live in San Rafael. Am married to a public school teacher, the dad of 2 kids that have come up through this wonderful school system here in Marin County. And I miss getting together with this community. So thank you for coming out. And I also miss giving you updates in person about the work that we're doing. There is this very negative narrative right now that nothing much happens in Washington, that it's totally dysfunctional, and there is plenty of dysfunction. I could tell you stories. But interestingly, we have actually gotten really big things done in these first 2 years of the Biden administration. And I think it's important to talk about that at the risk of even maybe bragging about that a little bit, because it makes a difference in people's lives. And I think everyone appreciates the recent things that have been in the news, the Inflation Reduction Act, which is going to do big, whoa! This is Halloween. This is great. Very spooky, Michelle, whatever you did to the lights. I'll just keep going and we'll try to roll with this. So look, you've been reading about the Inflation Reduction Act. It is really big and positive. The Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, those are all great. But, way back at the beginning of this presidency, President Biden started taking really big, bold actions that make a difference in people's lives. And that includes a Justice 40 initiative, which mandates that at least 40% of the benefits of certain federal programs have to start flowing to disadvantaged communities. It's about time that we do that. And, as we celebrate these recent legislative wins, which are really important, we can talk some more about that. Let's not forget that right out the gate with President Biden and our Democratic majority in the House and Senate, that we passed the American Rescue Plan, which was transformational, not only getting shots in arms and supporting the largest vaccine rollout in history, but also helping schools safely open, get kids back in class, get emergency relief to families, help keep a roof over people's heads, lift our economy out of a deep recession, totally out of the ditch. So that was huge. And we'll talk a little bit more about some elements of that, but it made a huge difference in people's lives. I should mention that the Inflation Reduction Act, which we celebrate for being the largest investment in climate action that we've ever seen, also was really huge for bringing down the cost of prescription drug prices. That makes a difference for struggling families, and stabilizing health care premiums by extending Affordable Care Act subsidies. The average family is going to see a benefit of about $800 a year in health premiums because of the Inflation Reduction Act. So there was a lot to that legislation, and it's going to make a big difference. Now, back to the American Rescue Plan. I think it is underappreciated that for at least 1 year in the American Rescue Plan, we were able to expand and improve the child tax credit. And that has a huge impact on lifting kids out of poverty. It resulted in 103,000 children in my district alone receiving $152 million, and that was in 2021. And, it expired. We had hoped that the benefits of that tax credit would be so compelling that there would be a political constituency for extending it, and we were not able to do that. Some of that is because our Build Back Better Act, which would have extended it, had to pass the Joe Manchin test in the Senate. And a lot of our goals and a lot of our hopes have been constrained these past 2 years because of Joe Manchin primarily. So we'll see what the voters of this country deliver to us in 18 days. I am hopeful that we will no longer be constrained in that way, and we can pick up the extension of that child tax credit and other pieces of our agenda that are really important. But the child tax credit is powerful. And I'll give you a couple stats about that. The average benefit, again, for the 44,300 households just in my district, is $3,000. Families with children in poverty will get received about $4,200 on average. And 8,600 kids in my district were, at least for that 1 year period, lifted out of poverty. It's such an important thing. 2,100 of those children were lifted out of deep poverty. So we've done more than that. President Biden, as you probably know, also approved student loan debt relief, and that is going to impact 95% of borrowers with student debt. And another positive thing, we've made really great progress on the digital divide, on expanding broadband access for rural and underserved communities. And again, that was through the American Rescue Plan, this huge legislation that we passed early in 2021. So there is a program there, the Federal Communication Commission's Emergency Connectivity Fund program, which in 1 year alone in my district has brought home almost $8 million to help close the homework gap by helping schools and libraries ensure that students can connect to the internet at home. And speaking of students, I know there are folks here who care deeply about special education and about disabled students. It's been one of my passions ever since I got to Congress to fully honor the federal government's original 40% funding commitment under the Individuals with Disabilities in Education Act, or IDEA. This is the big federal mandate and law that serves developmentally disabled kids. And during the last round of appropriations, we secured an increase, and this is rather historic, of $2.6 billion for that funding. So we are year after year catching up to that original promise of where we need to be. We're not there yet, but I work with a bipartisan coalition in Congress on this. It's also bicameral. We've got some champions in the Senate, and we are making steady progress every year toward actually meeting that goal. Now, I know that kids and families did not get the full extent of help that we had hoped for, and a lot of folks are struggling. You mentioned some of those struggles in your introductory remarks, and I appreciate that very much. The good pieces of the Build Back Better Act that did not make it to the finish line need to get over the finish line, bottom line. So again, we're 18 days away. We will see what the voters allow us to do. But if we have a functioning U.S. Senate, there are a lot of things that the House of Representatives has passed that can become law. Joe Biden will sign them into law. And so we're going to be watching those Senate races closely. Also, we got to kind of hold our House majority in order to keep this agenda moving forward. But let me talk for a moment about another critically important issue for not only working families and folks struggling in poverty, but all of us, and that's the climate crisis. My legislative agenda has always been about protecting the environment and promoting social justice. It's one of these things where if you really talk about wanting kids to have a bright future, you do need to make sure they have a planet they can live on. You got to make sure that they have clean air and clean water and natural resources so that they can actually live healthy lives. And this climate crisis is a global emergency that is pretty undeniable at this point. You just have to look around and see what's happening in any given week. It is already killing people. It is already reshaping how we live. It's reshaping where we live. And if it's left unchecked, it is literally going to make large swaths of this planet unlivable. So it is a big deal, and that's not for some distant generation. That's absolutely something that the young people that many of you work for are going to live to see. So we got our work cut out for us, and we should be acting with great urgency on this matter. And on that front, I am happy to report that my Democratic colleagues and I have delivered progress finally at the scale that we need to be acting at, and that's the Inflation Reduction Act and the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law. These are huge, historic investments in climate action, and the clean energy tax incentives and other direct funding provisions in those bills are probably the biggest part of it. But even there was more I wanted to do, more that my colleagues in the House and I wanted to do that was constrained by the limitations of the Senate. So let's hope that in 18 days we are in a better political position to do even more, because as excited as I am about the progress we have, we're now on track with the Inflation Reduction Act to reduce our 2005 carbon pollution baseline by 42% by the end of this decade. So we'll be 42% less greenhouse gas pollution than we were at 2005. our commitment in the Paris Agreement was to be 50% below that baseline. So we still got to find another 8% just to be where we promised we would be in Paris. And since Paris, we've figured out that that goal is not good enough. The planet needs us to be 1.5 degrees Celsius of warming and not 2 degrees Celsius, which is what Paris was based on. So I digress a little bit into wonkiness, but just to let you know, celebrate the progress, but this is not mission accomplished. We've got a lot more work to do. And even beyond California, the United States needs to lead globally on this issue because it's a global issue. I was at the climate conference in Glasgow, the last one, and it was really tough to hold our heads up there as Americans because we had come through this terrible 4-year period of the Trump administration, basically dismantling all of the environmental and climate progress that they could. But I will tell you this, in 3 weeks I will be in Egypt at the next climate conference, COP27, and we can hold our heads high now. We can credibly ask the other nations of the world to step up and do their part because we're finally beginning to walk the walk and to lead. So I am excited about all of that. We've got a lot of work ahead of us, a lot hanging in the balance in 18 days. And I'm happy to take whatever questions might be on your mind, but mainly I just want to thank you for being so great at being champions for kids and families and for playing such an important role in this community. So, Michelle, you want to ask questions?
Thank you, Congressman. We want to allow time for you to make comments and ask questions, so feel welcome to come up to either microphone. Okay. And while you're doing that, I'll ask the first question, so come on up. Can you tell us about Truman the cat and why he has 16,000 Facebook followers?
If any of you follow me on Facebook, you've taken this journey with me. I used to use Facebook all the time to update my constituents, and it was a great platform for all kinds of dialogue. I would sometimes vent in my Facebook posts in a fairly candid way. I would hear from my constituents. There were good conversations. And then Facebook changed its algorithm. You know, social media is a real mess these days. And Facebook just ceased to be what it used to be. A lot of my stuff, I guess, was not incendiary enough to trigger their algorithm, and people just stopped seeing it. But what I found was that whenever I posted a picture of my cat Truman, people saw it. It's like weird. The Facebook algorithm causes cat pictures to pop. And so eventually I just figured out I'm just going to dedicate it's going to be Truman the cat's Facebook page. And that's what it is. All of my posts are either, with a picture of Truman the cat or in Truman's name, in third-party voice. It seems kind of silly, but it's what I have to do in order to keep in touch with my constituents. So if any of you can persuade Facebook to undo that algorithm, I'm happy to go back to a normal Facebook page. But until then, please follow Truman the cat on Facebook.
The other morning, you had posted a picture of Truman with a good morning, and I was doing our office's Facebook page while watching the Today Show. My cat was on my lap, so my cat said good morning back to Truman. He's Marco, and they'd like to meet up sometime.
It's really, and it's a lot of fun actually getting all the cat pictures back from all the people on Facebook. So there's a great cat community. Yeah.
Hi, Congressman Huffman. First of all, I wanted to thank you for coming here. I had 2 questions, very different topics, but I hope I can jam them both in. So one is on climate, and the other is on housing. On the climate side, I really want to thank you for everything you've done. And in Marin in particular, we have the Marin Wildfire Prevention Agency. Yeah. So one thing, there was a good LA Times article yesterday where, for the last 18 years, we've reduced 60 million metric tons of carbon. And then in just 1 year, 2020 wildfires, we doubled that, 120 in the air. So it's almost like, we do all this work and then the wildfires are taking it all the way and we go backwards. So the question is, given that Marin is really already doing that in all the other counties, as well as different legislation like working with controlled burns or anything that can happen from federal level down, what could we do to really zero in on that? And then on the housing question, you know, I'm on the city council for Larkspur, and we're actively debating rent control. And it's, you know, we thought that was a Berkeley idea, but it's come to Marin. And we really are wondering at the federal level, for example, Section 8 housing, because I'm really trying to push more on the subsidy side so we don't cap and destroy our, you know, small landlords and housing base. If you could speak to any, you know, issues or initiatives or things that could come from the federal level to help us, you know, Larkspur, maybe even more Novato and San Rafael.
No, thank you, Councilman. I appreciate it. So let me go in reverse order. On the housing front, we are going to have to do more for Section 8 and the existing programs. The Build Back Better Act that passed out of the House would have also made some rather historic investments in affordable housing. We've got veteran housing vouchers here that I can help communities use in the right circumstances. So I hope that you will work with our office in every way we can. We got to get more Section 8 landlords signed up. And some folks in Marin County have been very creative and successful, I think, in doing that. But I've got to keep that funding flowing. And, you know, the election in 18 days will probably tell us a lot about whether we can put more money into those programs or whether, you know, we're going to be back in defense mode. But I certainly will just support, as your congressman, affordable housing projects wherever I can find them. So, you know, if there's ever anything I can do, if there's a federal agency standing in the way of a project moving forward, we want to help, and I hope you will stay in close touch with us about that. So on the wildfire piece, I wish I could tell you like there's one thing that we can do, because I am just as concerned about our carbon budget, you know, getting exhausted by some of these terrible fire years that we've had. But it's a lot of things, unfortunately. And decades, frankly, of poor management have gotten us to this point. Some of that poor management includes poor decisions on where to put people in the wildland interface. So I think at the local level, we're going to have to focus on that wildland-urban interface and just trying to be as resilient and ready for fire as possible. Prescribed burn is a critically important tool. Unfortunately, the huge fires this spring in New Mexico resulted from a prescribed burn that got out of hand. It was not properly done, and it's going to make it harder. The Forest Service had to put a moratorium on prescribed burn in place until we can do a full post-mortem on what went wrong and get some policies in place. But we've got to do more burning. It's counterintuitive to some people in order to have less massive catastrophic wildfires. You know, there are some who are going to try to use this crisis as a way to do a whole bunch of logging in the backcountry and to suggest to you that we can sort of log our way to fire resilience. You can't. No amount of logging in the backcountry is going to protect our communities or lessen the threat of these catastrophic fires. But smart vegetation management and fuel reduction we can and should do. And it's not a simple thing. The economics of the kind of vegetation you need to clear and remove are not great, because they're not the big merchantable logs that you know, timber companies make their money on. It's like brush and small trees, and some of it can't even be milled. Some of it, you know, we're still looking for things to do with it, you know, whether it's mulch or biofuel or char or other things. So we've got to keep pouring research into that, but even if we're subsidizing that vegetation management, we got to do it just for the public safety aspect of it, and you're right to connect it up to our climate goals. I think we're doing a pretty darn good job here in Marin County with our watersheds and with our resiliency planning, but there's a lot more that we can do. My district, as I told you initially, goes all the way to Oregon, so I've got several national forests, a lot of BLM land, and just an awful lot of areas where we are going to spend the next decade and more catching up on some of that vegetation management. And I'll also just thank the state, because they're putting record amounts of money into this effort for state land. They are partnering with federal agencies better than they have before. No one should think that nothing is happening in this space. There's actually a lot happening. The money is there, the effort is there. We're hiring more firefighters and more professionals who can proactively do these treatments on public lands. but it's going to take years to get us where we need to be, and the conditions are getting worse as we go. So I'm sorry I can't paint a happier picture in response to your question, but it's a very good one. Yeah. Hello.
Congressman, thank you so much for the work that you're doing on behalf of the constituents in your district. Appreciate that. I have a two-part question as well. On day 19, what is going to be your top priority? And is there some teasers that you can share with us that the House has passed through, but we're waiting on the Senate to do what they need to do?
Absolutely. Thank you for that question. So on day 19, day 19 begins what they call the lame duck session of Congress. And so we will have the rest of the calendar year into the first week of January for the current members to serve out the rest of this Congress before the new Congress gets elected. And, you know, who wins and who loses in the election will kind of determine the character of that lame duck session. And they're very hard to predict. You know, sometimes if you've done very well in the election, there's less incentive to get things done in the lame duck because you're going to get better numbers on for your party in January. But sometimes departing members who maybe have lost or are retiring have a little more political courage to cast votes in those final couple of months. So I'm going to try to get everything I can done in the lame duck session, but you know, big things happen in the lame duck session. It's the weirdest thing. But no one can really tell you what they're going to be because we got to just sort of spin the wheel and see where it lands. But then you asked, what was the second part? Oh, yeah. Things that, if things go well, that we could get done that we've already passed out of the House. I love talking about this because, look, just about everything I care about, probably everything you care about, this House of Representatives has passed bills and sent them over to the Senate to codify a federal right to an abortion, to codify access to contraception, to codify LGBTQ equality, to expand the child tax credit, to have universal pre-K, to have elder care, all of these things. We've passed it out. We passed an assault weapons ban out of the House of Representatives. Okay, so think of all of those things as the range of possibilities if we can hold a House majority and get 2 more senators to dump the filibuster and allow all these things to come to votes. And they will pass, and President Biden will sign them into law. So, yeah, we're all worried about what happens in 18 days, but we should also be kind of excited about the possibility that with 2 more senators, we could really do some big and transformative things. Yeah. Hi, Craig.
Good morning. Hey, some people.
Okay. Thank you.
And I'll address it.
And Craig, were you going to ask a question as well?
Yeah.
Great.
As you have the paperwork there, this article came out in 2017. It was about Mexico when the climate crisis took place there and the situation in 39 locations involving 6 million residents of Mexico. And Congress signed into that agreement in 2004 with President Fox. Are you familiar with that?
No, I'm not.
Okay.
2004.
That's when the article,
yeah.
That's when the agreement for affordable housing was developed in Mexico
Okay.
with Homex, President Fox, and Congress. And unfortunately, the situation was so corrupt, those 39 locations, 6 million people, the whole thing fell apart. As you can see in the picture, there's 69 pages to the report total, but I didn't want to print all those out. I forwarded the hyperlink to you. But that's one situation you might want to take in consideration for your climate and environmental control. You put out with the bill that you put out in 2020 and 2021, those 2 bills that didn't include this. So it needs to be looked into. And I didn't know what the United States is doing with our southern country, neighboring country of Mexico for that condition. So that's one article. And the other situation is the climate situation. In 65 years now, Highway 37 has put a carbon footprint. And you've known since 2015 when I brought the engineering programs to yourself, and I brought it to Senator Mike McGuire. And the engineering programs sets for a 4-lane elevated skyway, which Caltrans is calling a causeway. I don't know what the difference in terminology is, but that needs to be done, and it needs to be 4 lanes each way, prefabricated, so that would return the wildlife, return the wetlands, and eliminate the carbon footprint that's taking place there now.
Yeah.
Thank you. Appreciate
it. So I'll look into this and learn a little bit about what happened with this Mexico thing, but I especially appreciate your point about Highway 37. I have been doing everything I can to get that on a better track because I actually agree. It's a critical, dysfunctional transportation corridor, very vulnerable to sea level rise. It's already disrupted by flooding and high tides, and in 20, 25 years, it's going to be underwater. So the only answer, I think, is an elevated causeway. We got to get the SMART train on that elevated causeway as well, and bike and pedestrian paths, make it multimodal. And if you do that, that North Bay wetland complex was once massive, and there's a lot of diked ag lands and other things now that used to be wetlands. But if you get rid of that Highway 37 footprint and have an elevated causeway, you open up the possibility of the largest wetland restoration on the entire west coast of North America. It's massive, and that is a solution, a natural buffer against sea level rise and extreme weather for North Bay communities. It is also a powerful, what we call blue carbon engine. These salt marshes are some of the most powerful natural systems to sequester carbon, way more powerful than even trees. Even the redwood trees that we think of as carbon sequesterers pale in comparison to salt marshes and eelgrass and mangroves in these estuaries. So this restoration alone, if we get it right, would be the equivalent of taking 6,000 cars a year off the highway permanently. It's probably big. Dennis and his colleagues are struggling with building codes, and should we allow natural gas appliances and hookups to new construction? It's important. I totally support them where they're going, but the numbers on that pale in comparison to restoring those wetlands in terms of what you can do for your carbon pollution benefits. So it's one of the biggest opportunities we have. But we've got to turn Caltrans and MTC around, because they look at that big, ambitious, multi-benefit, resilient project, the kind of thing we talk about as a climate-forward infrastructure planning, and it's just not what they do. And so they're going to just propose widening the highway and hardening the existing roadway that prevents all that wetland restoration, that will make it vulnerable in a couple of decades to sea level rise once again, and they're going to spend $500 million doing that if we don't stop them. So I have been lighting my hair on fire to try to get this redirected. And Dennis, thanks so much to you and your colleagues for approving a letter just last week making some of these points to MTC and Caltrans. They're just going to business as usual, and if they do, it's going to be a huge missed opportunity, and we will regret it, and it'll be a boondoggle for the taxpayers. So I'm with you on this, Craig, and I'm doing everything I can to get it turned around.
Well, the other part of it too is that pathway will make an access way for all the first responders to
Absolutely.
3 different counties.
Yeah. All right.
Hi, Jared. He told me to call him Jared.
Yeah, totally.
So I sort of have a 2-part question, and I really want to focus it on sort of this concept of not sort of inclusion, diversity inclusion, but very much inclusion in a county where we talk about 1 in 3 people are in need and things. And this messaging around how do we message the affluent people in our community. In our house, we have a term, we call it rich people problems. How do we influence those people to have a thoughtful conversation about inclusion? And what kind of guidance can you give our local officials and in building that conversation? And the reason I say that is because we live in neighborhoods where we want to have affordable housing. Our teachers cannot afford to live in the neighborhoods that we have. We're looking now at TK coming into schools, and I'm working on a strategic committee to see, okay, how many classrooms do we have to build? What do they look like? Where are those teachers going to come from? School districts that have no money, some school districts that have a lot of money, and neighborhoods that are, for lack of a better word, NIMBYs.
Yeah.
How do we have that conversation to welcome those people in our neighborhoods? What kind of guidance can you give on that? And then I'll ask a
Sure. No, thanks,
follow-up.
Carl. Well, I'm glad that you are having that conversation, and it has been a longstanding problem in Marin County. You know, I'm actually very grateful to the original environmentalists in Marin County who fought bad developments and protected our open spaces and helped, you know, preserve the wonderful the way of life that we have in Marin. But I think fast forward to today, it is time to reimagine what it means to have quality of life in a community like Marin. We've got enormous equity problems. The cost of living here is just untenable. And I think the best way to have this conversation, Carl, my suggestion, would be to focus on the projects that have happened that are just fine. Communities are, you know, healthy and desirable and wonderful even when they build affordable housing and mixed use and other things that we need them to do to tackle this problem. And I think that kind of demystifies it a little bit for some of the folks that think, you know, all workforce housing and all mixed use housing is going to somehow ruin their way of life. It's not. It's where we need to go. And then also just talk about the people we need to have a healthy, functioning community, the first responders, the teachers, the child care and elder care providers. It is impossible for them to live here if we don't tackle this problem. And so you would hope out of their own enlightened self-interest, they might be able to stretch their sensibilities a little bit and get there. But I also think as much as we still have a lot of work to do, we have come a long way from, you know, the times when, you know, all housing was sort of demonized, and, you know, we're getting there. We got to speed it up and we got to do more. But I think of the turmoil around, you know, that project in Corte Madera. What's the big one? WinCup. Oh, I mean, it was the end of the world if we did this, and it's not the end of the world. It's actually kind of nice, and it's okay, and life went on. So, again, I think the more we sort of live and see the benefits of some of those projects and that the world did not end, the more it's going to be easier to do the next one.
Thank you, and I agree. I remember the WinCup and having to be the only YIMBY in the room in some of those meetings. I also wanted to ask, you talk about the Inflation Reduction Act and some of these, a lot of dollars for climate initiatives and things like that. And one of the things that we did in Larkspur, Corte Madera, Tiburon, and Belvedere a number of years ago was we had a traffic problem. And instead of facing ideas of, oh, let's widen roads and things like that, our question was, how do we take more cars off the road? And we worked with the Joint Powers, and we got funding for school buses. And it alleviated traffic 40, 50, 60% for those types of things. And if you'll go back to when Prop 13 was passed, you know, the first thing that went in school budgets was school buses because people spent money on education. And when I think about the climate benefits of taking cars off the roads and the number of people, is there a way that we can tap into some of those federal dollars and instead of building more roads, putting kids on school buses and really getting those public transportation options more convenient and feasible so that we have a two-pronged effect.
Yeah, no doubt about it. So the federal government's role in public education mostly exists in a few specific categories. IDEA, which I mentioned earlier, is by far the biggest, but school transportation is one, and nutrition is kind of the other biggie. But on transportation, these bills that I've talked about put records levels of money on the table to upgrade the old yellow school buses to new electric yellow school buses, which is a real good thing because the air quality in those old diesel buses is terrible. The more we learn about what our kids have been breathing in for all these years, the more you understand why, maybe all the moms and dads piled them into minivans and clogged our roads instead of putting them on those. But you're right, they also cut the budgets and kind of eliminated those buses. We need school buses. I believe. I'm a big fan of school buses, but they should be clean and safe, and we've got the money to do that now. Yeah.
Thank you.
Good morning, Congressman Huffman. Aaron Burnett, Canal Alliance. Appreciate a lot of these earlier questions. One of the earlier questions talked about rent stabilization a little bit. I think I share in your excitement of the passage of the IDA. There's a lot of investment in infrastructure that's going to be coming in, and how do we make sure that that investment is not simply a tool for gentrification, specifically with regard to the tax credits that are going to be given to homeowners and landlords? How do we make sure that after they make these investments in their property, they don't A, pass the cost on to low-income tenants, or B, end up kicking out the current tenants and making the new rent cost prohibitive?
Yeah. Well, I think somebody was mentioning rent control a little bit earlier, and I am a big fan of rent control. So I think our local governments are primarily where those happen, at the state level as well. But I think there's a role to play for them in making sure that that doesn't happen. But in terms of the actual crafting of these tax credits and other policies, a lot of work has gone in on the front end to try to achieve this EJ40 vision. And it is historic and, should help a lot of that money flow through to disadvantaged communities. And you're absolutely right to flag this. Well, we don't want the landlords in disadvantaged communities to take the money and gentrify or to take the money and jack up rents. But I think making sure that doesn't happen is largely going to be in the hands of state and local authorities where those decisions are primarily made. And I'm happy to work on it. Obviously, let's keep in touch and try to make sure that does not happen here. But I think it's going to take all of us working together.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Hi.
Hello. Good morning, Congressman. I'm here in front of the Postpartum Support Center, and I'm trying to help a lot of our families and mothers, specifically with maternal mental health. And currently in our county, there is no maternal mental health treatment. There's a general behavior mental health treatments, but inpatient maternal mental health treatment doesn't exist. And there is also a lot, as you know, mental health is overtaxed everywhere in the state, in the country. But we here have a problem with getting treatment and waiting for a month or 2 months to be seen by our therapists. Is there any federal funding, any state funding, anything that's coming to help address this issue that we're having? And if if a mother is suffering, if parents are suffering, the whole family is suffering, the community is suffering, work is suffering. So I just want to hear if you have any information on that. Thank you.
Well, no, thank you for the question. I would love to see a much more robust funding of all mental health at all levels. And I don't want to give too much credit for the federal government. We've taken some baby steps, right? So in the Affordable Care Act, there's some language there that at least pays lip service to mental health being something that should be covered by your insurance. It hasn't really worked out that way. And so we need to do more at the policy level to require health insurance to include full mental health parity. That would go a long way. We can do that through Medicaid and Medicare as well. But you may remember after the terrible Uvalde shooting in Texas, like Republicans were under so much pressure they felt like they had to do something. But you can't do anything about guns, right, in their world. And so we did get some additional mental health funding in the name of a gun violence prevention response. It doesn't really speak directly to your maternal mental health question, but it's another, I guess, step forward in the long road of catching up to mental health funding that we need to travel. We'll keep trying to do more.
I'll hold you for your word. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. We want to be sure to get to our last three questions here. Do you want to go ahead and then?
Yeah.
Sure, happy to. Jenny Pfeiffer, I'm Belina Stinson School District Trustee.
Great.
Hi, and those should be electric school buses, by the way, that's just an aside. Our district is very lucky because we have a lot of basic aid tax money coming in. Makes us a very wealthy district, but that also means that those homes that were bought for large amounts of money now can't house our minimum wage workers, so our school district has dropped in population. There is a federal minimum wage, but there's no federal oversight about the level that qualify people as poverty. In Marin County, housing puts our minimum wage workers, which is set at the federal level, at a disadvantage because they have to make way more money to qualify for housing on need than they could possibly make on those minimum wages. So my question is there any way there could be a leveling of that classification for need for affordability at a federal level so that can be leveled off?
I wish. So a couple of things. I mentioned a lot of the good stuff that was in the Build Back Better Act that we passed out of the House, and that kind of a lot of it died in the Senate. There was a minimum wage increase in there too. There were so many other good things that people forget, that there was a minimum wage increase that would have also indexed the minimum wage so that we don't have to fight about it every few years. But we were trying to wedge that into these arcane Senate rules for budget reconciliation, and the parliamentarian threw out the minimum wage piece. At any rate, your question is about high cost of living places like California and Bolinas and Stinson, and when we get to these formulas, why can't there be flexibility? And we deal with this all the time because we are stuck with these national formulas that don't reflect the high cost of living that we have here. And you know, there are other places in the country that have similar problems. We've been totally unsuccessful at creating any kind of regional or localized cost of living flexibility. And it is mostly just politics. The folks in the red states and the rural states don't like us very much, and if they see us getting more under these formulas, they're just not going to support it, even though they know our cost of living is a lot higher. So I'm just being rather candid with you about that. There's probably very little I can do in the current political climate to provide that flexibility that would consider our higher cost of living in these formulas.
Just wanted to say thanks for all the good things that you do out there, all your good work.
I appreciate it. Thank you. Thank you.
Good morning, and thank you for joining us this morning. My name is Maya Bartoff. I'm a resident of San Rafael, and I really appreciate your efforts around environment and climate. And I appreciated hearing about preservation and fire threat, but my concern is really drought and our water supplies in this region. And I'm wondering what are the efforts, are happening at a federal level and at a local level here. And
Yeah, no,
appreciate that.
super important question. Obviously, you kind of need water.
Right.
And
And you hear about developing and affordable housing, and
Yeah.
how does that all make sense when we have limited water supplies?
Right.
Yeah, yeah.
yeah, no, thanks. And look, I'm sorry if I've done a lot of bragging about bills that we've passed out of the House, but I really should have bragged about the water part, because I got to write a lot of that legislation. I have been spending years, I came out of the water world, I've spent a lot of my life working on water infrastructure and water policy. And so I definitely shaped the water infrastructure provisions in the Bipartisan Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, which are putting historic levels of money on the table, not for big controversial things that don't help most people. Like in the past, we've fought a lot over like some large controversial dam that was going to help a small set of politically influential irrigators in the Central Valley. It's usually the way California water goes. But no, I did like a listening tour and really talked to water managers, and we identified the categories of things that actually make you resilient. The advanced water treatment and regional conveyance upgrades and groundwater management and stormwater capture, and obviously water conservation, in some places desalination where that makes sense. But there's this toolbox of things that will actually make us much, much more resilient in the Western United States, where pretty much the entire West is suffering from one of the more critical extended droughts we've seen ever. And some of that money is going to start flowing through. The Marin Municipal Water District is going to secure millions and millions of dollars to hopefully build out some of these things that they are studying. And they are doing, I think, a very appropriate study of different scenarios, not, in my opinion, crazy pipeline across the Richmond Bridge, but smarter things that can actually work regionally here in the North Bay with Sonoma County, with North Marin Water District, and other partners to just have a much more resilient system in a cost-effective way. Wastewater, we've got some wastewater people here in the room as well. And it was pointed out before we began here that maybe the term wastewater itself is almost an oxymoron, that we should never waste water, and we shouldn't think of any kind of water as waste. It's a wonderful resource. We just got to clean it up and put it to use. So there's record levels of federal money available to do all of that. And I am hopeful that we'll draw down a lot of that and begin to, it is the new normal. We are going to see more of these drought cycles, and they're going to last longer, they're going to be deeper, but we can actually get through it if we do all these things. So I wouldn't think of it as a choice. You sort of suggested, what about new housing if we're out of water?
I realize it's a very complex issue, and our water board has done really well over the years, but it just seems like in just the past couple of years, it seems we were threatened with a very serious water crisis, and it feels like we've been relying on conservation and kind of a prayer for a big rain.
Yes, I agree.
And
A faith-based strategy.
A lot of communication about, other than the pipeline, really future-looking, innovative solutions to this crisis. And I think I can speak as a resident myself. It seems ironic we have a housing development going up in our area, which is having gray water, which is a great thing. But our residents in our own community have lived there and invested in their yards and so forth, and there's no access to those gray water situations. So, I'm looking for community solutions and dialogue, and just, your ideas about how to get that conversation and communication going within our district and region.
Yeah.
So, anyway, thank you.
I think we're going to make a lot of progress on what you just described here with this funding and with some of the planning that's underway right now.
Okay, well, thank you again.
Thank you.
Good morning, Congressman, and good morning, everyone. My name is Dr. Waldu. We have discussed many things today of all the accomplishments, as well as what you guys are working on to better our communities in our district here, as well as just the greater California. Everything is wonderful There are a little bit more urgent concerns for me and my family here as well. And that concern is currently, for the past 2 years, there's an active genocide where I come from, northern Ethiopia. And there are some incredible people here that may not know about it due to a complete blackout for the past 2 years. And I want to encourage all of you here to visit and see if there's something you can do. But more importantly, Congressmen, your colleagues, Congressman Brad Sherman, Congressman Gregory Meeks, including Republican Congressman McCall, and many others who have been an active voice for us in Congress to get the State Department as well as the executive branch to do something in terms of end the suffering that is unimaginable. If you Google Tigray genocide, you will hear, you will see, and you will read what I'm talking about from Human Rights Watch, Amnesty International, Tigray genocide, T-I-G-R-A-Y, genocide. And I am here to ask you, there is an important bill called Ethiopia Peace Act. It is very important for us and our families in Ethiopia that this suffering ends. As going to be 2 years November 4th. It was pre-planned to start on election day, presidential election, and now November 4th is going to be 2 years, and there's absolutely no solution, and most people haven't even heard of it. Please work with your colleagues, and what can you do or what can we do to connect you to those colleagues who have been working tirelessly day and night to engage with the executive branch, the State Department, particularly to end this genocide and bring peace to us, that we have not been able to access our families. They have not been able to access any banking system. There are no schools for the children for the past 3 years. There's no health system, and we need an end to this so that we can communicate with them and provide them some assistance so that they can stay alive and for us to have our families and identity. So what can we do with you, or what can you do with your colleagues to get these bills as a co-sponsor and moving forward so that something can be done to move this genocide out the way? Thank you very much.
I thank you for that, Doctor, and I was talking to your sister about this beforehand as well. So I will commit to take another look at this. There are terrible atrocities taking place in Ethiopia, and I feel terrible about your family being in harm's way. When we look at images like that coming out of Ukraine and some other places around the world, sometimes it's easier to figure out what we need to do in those situations because it's very clear who's at fault. That's Putin doing awful Hitler-like things in Ukraine, and so that then informs how we approach and what we need to do about it. When I have asked about this terrible, also just harrowing situation in Ethiopia, our State Department and others have told me it's less clear, that it's a conflict on both sides and that there are atrocities going back and forth. And so we've kind of become paralyzed by that assessment, I guess, of the situation. But you're right, it continues to fester and get worse, and there's got to be something we can do. So I'll take a look at those bills. I will push back on these assessments that I get back, and I'll try to figure out if there's something that I can do to end the bloodshed. And maybe we should just stop trying to figure out who's at fault and just try to end the bloodshed. So, yeah.
And that concludes the section on questioning. Thank you so much for all of your questions and your engagement. And Congressman, thank you so much for spending time with us and answering all of our questions. Another maybe round of applause for the Congressman.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Before we go, can we do one little plug from the League of Women Voters?
So Representative Huffman mentioned that there is an election coming up. November 8th is the last day to vote. If you live in California, you got a ballot in the mail if you're registered. If you didn't get one, you're probably not registered. So call your county elections department. If you're in Marin, we have a lot of local information, but we also have statewide information if you're from another county. We're happy to help you out here, and please vote.
Thank you.